Good day, colleagues. This is my reflections, The Road to Cultural Proficiency. Episode 1, Why Can't You Learn from Me? I had to learn three things. Number one, excuses grounded in deficit thinking about our students' socioeconomic origins, race, ethnicity, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, ableness, or faith are no longer acceptable. Our mindset dictates how we operate. Do you have a fixed mindset in which deficit thinking is dominant, or do you have a growth mindset in which you are willing to learn from all individuals? Comments like they can't do that because of where they come from. They live east of the river, or only the kids that come from that type of school can do the work. Or even worse, that's the low class, the AGC class, all God's children, the class with all the touched babies in it. Those are all comments that I have once upon a time made to students and about my students. And yes, prior to me coming to Roosevelt, I primarily taught at a school that was 98% Black and Brown students. Believe it or not, those were comments that I made. Our identity is what makes us who we are. I grew up in a two-parent household. We were Christians, went to church every Sunday. Education was valued. In fact, my father used to say, your only job is to go to school and get a good education. Be better than me and your mom. Respect and integrity were things that were instilled to me and my brother. Even to this day, some of my values are conservative and others are liberal. All of these, however, mesh together to make me the educator who I am today. There's more than one identity that operates within us. While we each have our individual identities, we also have group identities that come into play when we interact. Are we inclusive and welcoming in our speech, our emotions, our attitudes, and our actions? Those are all things that I've had to learn on my journey towards cultural proficiency. Equity is about eliminating oppressive systems. Well, we'll talk a lot more about that. But the first thing we have to kind of eliminate are those unmightyisms, things such as racism, sexism, ethnocentrism, and heterosexism. These are all barriers, oftentimes self-imposed, that hinder us from learning from others and hinder our students from learning from us. This work is very difficult. It's hard, it's uncomfortable. The conversation surrounding the unmightyisms may have some people feeling anger and others feeling guilt. It is meant to make you become more confident in your ability to embrace all cultures of those you interact. It is not meant to blame you, it is not meant to shame you. It is meant to make you more culturally proficient. Marginalized students feel isolated in educational environments. Let's face it, schools historically were not designed for minorities, people of color, people who are not initially uh, in this mode of what an American is. Policy tends to consequence students of color disproportionately. Students who are marginalized tend to perform below their peers and further widen the achievement, or what some in research like to say the opportunity gap. Removing those barriers is critical. We have to remove the barriers that cause our students not to be able to learn from us. One first step is to embrace students' culture as an asset to the learning environment. So we have the story of Omicron. And Omicron was a class that I taught at Howard University Middle School of Math and Science during the 2018 and 2019 school year. And that school year was actually the school year where I began the process of trying to become more culturally proficient. Because some of the same things that I would uh, talk negatively on about white teachers or teachers of other races, I was doing the exact same thing to people of my own race. And so, as we talk about equity, race will come up, but at the same time, it's more about being able to uh, learn strategies to be, uh, to have a classroom, I should say, that is more inclusive to all students. So Omicron at Howard Math and Science, we taught either sixth grade, seventh grade, or eighth grade. Sixth grade was on the second floor, seventh grade was on the third floor, and eighth grade was on the fourth floor. And this group of students was a Math 7 support class. It was the only seventh grade class I had. There were 18 students, 8 had IEPs, 2 more had 504 plans, and I would often say all but 4 are bad. All but 4 were just plain bad. So I thought. This group of students only came to the fourth floor for 2 classes, their second and third period, and I had them third period. So second period, they had technology at one end of the hallway, and I was at the other end of the fourth floor, and they came to me for Math 7 support. I think because they were on a different floor, they really thought it was free cess. And at our school, we called it free cess. They were given a 30-minute block of time where they can kind of go outside and just kind of unwind. Inclement weather, would go to the auditorium, but just something away from the academics. And I truly thought that these group of students thought my class was extended free cess time. One point I want you to think about: there's always a reason why students operate the way they do. I didn't know until maybe later on that one reason why they acted the way they did was because they were away from all their other teachers, they were away from their dean. But there was another reason why they also acted the way they did when they came to my class, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Horseplay was a big problem for the group out of their seats, hitting each other, wrestling. Yes, they were out of control. They laughed at the consequence system at the school. I had to ready myself for verbal assaults at any point if I contacted a parent. Despite every effort, nothing seemed to work. I developed blood pressure issues, had to take medication for that. And I felt that the group of students just were blatantly disrespectful, had no home training, and I didn't feel supported by school leaders. I found myself yelling a lot, just trying to keep order. I was saying hurtful things, like calling them animals and half raised children. One student even asked me, Why do you get mad when I hit somebody back? My mama told me if someone hits me back or hits me, I should hit them back. I thought about what she said and agreed because my mama used to tell me the same thing. But the difference was I was raised not to instigate a fight nor disrupt class. So, another point I want you to consider: parents of marginalized students often send their child to school with the belief that the school should handle issues that arise. Whether you believe it or not, that oftentimes is the case. Also, not everyone is raised the same way. Omicron was never prepared for class. These kids will come into the room, they didn't have pencils, never had their supplies. Each day I watched students come to class with no paper or pencil. They didn't have no notebook. They didn't care if they got a zero. If I did things such as you can borrow a pencil and get some paper if you give me a piece of collateral, some students would argue and others would just plainly state, I don't have anything to give. An administrator, the dean of culture, actually decided to do a restorative circle conducted by him, and most of the students felt I was doing too much. One couldn't figure out why I just couldn't give them paper and pencil if they didn't have it in class. Another student remarked, I give you a hard time because you keep making comments about our parents not caring because I don't have supplies. You want to go on my mom's, I'm going to go on your class. And that was facts. That's how he presented it. These were seventh graders. When I tell you that was eye opening, the fact that they were reading me like a book made me want to change. So, a third thing I want you to consider is parents send us the best they have. And that piece of advice came to me from a parent. Mr. Ware, I send you the best that I have. Whether, again, we like it or not, we have to come to that realization. Omicron also has students who had difficulty learning. They weren't motivated to do the work. They weren't persevering. They didn't even try. They didn't put forth an effort. One student I attempted to help kind of pushed me away and then made the comment, all you do is frown. How do you expect me to learn from you when it doesn't look like you want to be here or want me in this class? I thought about it and realized my face was telling the whole story. A last point to consider: our faces, our emotions, our mannerisms will tell the story. It will tell others how we truly feel. Students sense that regardless of what happens from day to day, period to period, even moment to moment. I've had to learn it's okay to take a minute to get your feelings back in check, step away for a moment, scream, do whatever, and then come back, act as if it's a new beginning, and continue with the tough work of educating our young people. So here's some things to consider. There's always a reason why students operate the way they do. Not everyone is raised the same way. Parents send us the best they have, and our actions and mannerisms will tell the true story of how we feel. So, over the next few weeks, we'll be talking about cultural proficiency and the textbook definition or a textbook definition would be cultural proficiency, is a mindset, a worldview, a way of being that is assumed by a person for effectively describing, responding to, and planning for issues that arise in diverse environments. There's a continuum. It starts with cultural destructiveness and ends with cultural proficiency. We don't want to be in the red. We don't want to be in cultural destructiveness. We don't want to disparage other cultures. We don't want the idea of your culture is insignificant and we don't want you here. There are enough people in our world like that today. Think back to January 6th. Neither do we want cultural incapacity. I feel one culture is dominant and I'm going to elevate that one. And I feel another culture is not dominant and I minimize or try to make it irrelevant. That's cultural incapacity. Cultural blindness. Okay. That whole idea of I don't see color. I don't see differences. I'm colorblind. I want you to see my color. Your students want you to see their color, their diversity. So the top three on the screen, cultural destructiveness, cultural incapacity, and cultural blindness, are mindsets that we kind of want to eliminate in order for all of our students. And we know the science and tech students are going to do it. They're going to rise to the occasion. But what about our supportive intensive students? What about our co-taught students? What about our students with our IEPs and the 504s? Are we remembering them in our lessons and how we teach our subject? Cultural precompetence is in yellow. Why? You're getting there. The fact that you are listening to this presentation, the fact that you are willing to acknowledge you don't know everything, you are uncomfortable with dealing with certain cultures. It's okay. That's part of cultural precompetence. The fact that you are willing to acknowledge that means that you are on your way to cultural proficiency. Cultural competence, the ability to interact with other groups, okay, to expand your knowledge base so you can become a more effective educator. And lastly, cultural proficiency, which is ultimately where we all want to be. And I'm not there yet. Maybe somewhere between competence and proficiency, but it's when you're advocating for others. Okay? You're not going to allow for comments or deficit thinking by no student or about any student, regardless of their ability level. That's what cultural proficiency is all about. So here's the strategy. Here's the strategy. Incorporate student culture into your lesson. Students need to know you care about them. And I know sometimes the cliche building relationships is used a lot. Yes, we have to build relationships with our students, but we have to go beyond just building relationships. Hey, how was your weekend? Things like that. Do you really know about your students' culture? Roosevelt is a very diverse school with students from many different countries. Okay. So, do you know about a particular student and what country they came from? Maybe there are some stories that that student could share. And so, there are three ideas that will help in incorporating the strategy of incorporating student culture into your lesson. Number one, find out something about a student's identity or culture and embed the information in an example or a problem related to your content. We've been talking about food insecurity. as part of a social justice component in my geometry classes. So my geometry, science, and tech students are at a point now where they are looking to put the geometric practice into action. You have 3 locations or 3 neighborhoods. One student decided that it would be a good idea to sell a cultural dish, actually not sell, but to give away a cultural dish to students or families in 3 neighborhoods. However, they needed to decide where could they place the pop-up shop to distribute the food to the needed families and the needed people. And so concepts of parts of a triangle and concurrence of a triangle and so forth, not to bore you with a lot of the mathematics, but what happened was students were creating examples. Some discussions that I had within my class, I allowed students to, or I listened to what students were sharing and used some of those examples as well as a means to help facilitate the discussion. So I need to look at my notes because sometimes I start talking off topic. So I have one student who's from Haiti, and what she talked about one day in class was a favorite dish in her family. And so, to give an example of how to identify certain concurrence points within a triangle, we created a problem where Angelica's family decided, Angelica and her friends decided to distribute this dish to all the families in need between 3 neighborhoods. And they had to identify where should the location of that place be. That's just one example. Idea 2, have students write a story or create a problem that describes them, their culture, or community, and use the stories in your lesson. As a non-math example, maybe something from social studies. Have a discussion on symbols or objects that are symbolic within our democracy, going back to that January 6th event. You might start off by asking students what symbols are meaningful in their homes, and use that as a means to help them branch out and have a further discussion on democratic symbols or symbols within our democracy. Some homes may cherish a Bible. Other homes may cherish a picture. I know growing up in my home, we had the picture of Martin Luther King and what he stood for. So all of those things, there's nothing too large or too small where you can incorporate student ideas, student culture, student sense of self within your classroom or your lesson. Idea 3, embed cultural aspects of student lives into your lesson. Here's an example, maybe if you taught health, PE, dance, have students identify a dance that is performed in their homes or at family gatherings. Have a discussion about it, or better yet, have students demonstrate either live or by videotaping themselves performing the dance. Maybe then have students demonstrate the moves, identify the amount of calories burned, maybe the pulse rate, things of that nature. Maybe find out, have students interview family members, maybe an example from science. Interview family members and find out what disease affects our family, and have the students do a report or a presentation about that disease. So there are many different lenses in which a student's identity or culture can be embedded within your classroom. Remember, we all have curriculum to teach, but oftentimes our most marginalized students come with deficits in their learning. And so it's okay to have teachable moments and to steer away a little bit from the content that you must teach, as long as it's adding to a student's overall learning and their overall academic identity. So here's your task. Try out the strategy of incorporating student culture into your lesson. Let me know your thoughts of the strategy or any other feedback regarding this presentation by commenting or sending me an email or tweet. It won't happen overnight. It will take time for marginalized and disengaged students to come around. Remember, baby steps, baby steps. It may not show up immediately in grades, but it will lead to greater culture or greater effort and a willingness to engage and learn the material. Yes, I want my students to be able to demonstrate mastery of the material taught, but it's also meaningful to me when students remark how they appreciate an example or an activity that relates to them or their culture. Stay tuned for an upcoming equity session after school on overcoming moral barriers, a discussion of oppressive systems as barriers to student learning. You don't want to miss it. For more information, you can email me at rlware12@gmail.com, or you can connect with me on Twitter at @mathallday. Take care. See you guys soon.